Hi friends, Mindy here. Welcome back for another installment of Tag Tuesday. This week I'm going to be working with some Tim Holtz stencils and some Neocolor2 crayons. So Neocolor2 crayons are water soluble. Neocolor ones are not. The original version is not water soluble. So if you want to try this, make sure you have the Neocolor 2s. I was very inspired by this color palette that I saw in someone's artwork on Instagram. I cannot remember her name right at the moment. I was just kind of scrolling, and it's not normally a color palette I personally would reach for, just to like start off a project, but it was so beautiful and I was so inspired by it that I wanted to try it. And so a good way to kind of do those things is on tags because it's just very low pressure. So what I am doing is, you can see I just randomly scribbled these crayons out onto these tags. I am working on Bristol Vellum Smooth card paper, so these are not actual like tags. This is more mixed media paper, so it just holds up for this process better. And then I just randomly scribbled. There was no rhyme or reason to any of it. I just whatever felt good at the time. And then I'm pulling in some gesso. So this is a heavier bodied gesso that I'm using here, but I'm using this to activate the pigment instead of using water. And so you can see that it does lighten the colors a little bit, but it also just gives it kind of a hazy, cloudy, blendy kind of feel to it that I just really, really love. I like doing this process a lot. I like doing it in my Bibles even. And so now I'm going over to this other side and just kind of working my way down through those kind of ombre colors. But then I had this kind of salmon color with these as well. And these, again, this is just not a color palette that I would, start out with for myself. But I'm actually really enjoying it. And I really love how these tags turned out. So, if you see something that inspires you, a color palette that's maybe not what you're normally used to or whatever, just try it. Get some tags, try it and see what happens. So you can see these colors are very light. So I dried them very well. And now I'm going to come in here with a heavier hand with these Neocolors and just do a second coat. I don't really care that I'm coloring the same colors in the same areas. That doesn't really matter. This is just a background color anyway. And so I added some other colors, and now I'm actually going to come in with a gesso wash. So whenever my gesso bottle gets down to the very end, instead of just kind of tossing it or whatever, I just add some water to it and I create a wash. And I do this that way. I always have like some watered down gesso that I can use for splatters and all those kinds of things, and to help blend things. And anyway, I just always have it on hand. And so that's what I'm going to be using here for this card now, just because I didn't want to lighten up the color anymore than it had kind of already gotten. So obviously you're adding white to pigment, it's going to get lighter. So going back through that same process where I just went through the little scribbly bits, and I am adding this gesso wash, but this kind of got like really yellow on me. That yellow was really intense that I was using. And so I'm just going to add back in some of this kind of olive green. I do not remember the names of these colors. I'm sorry. And I have already put the crayons back. So some of it was just, I just grabbed what looked like that palette and started working. So going through, adding some gesso. You can see I'm coloring right into the wet gesso on here. It's totally fine. It doesn't hurt the crayons. It's totally fine. Scribbling in just a little bit more color here where I want it. I am, once in a while kind of brushing my paintbrush off onto my drop paper there, but I'm not cleaning my brush necessarily. So now I'm going to work with this other card where I have kind of more of the ombre color situation happening. Going to do the same thing, add a little bit more color in here. I decided that one yellow was just really intense, so I changed that up at the top. And I'm going to go through same process. I'm just going to add some more gesso. And this is, again, the watered down version. So this is the gesso wash. And I am kind of doing a circular motion just to kind of help this blend. You could, because I just, basically scribbled on these, on these pieces of paper. You can see here, after the green, after that darkest green, I did, kind of use the drop paper to get rid of some of that paint. And then I just went right into the pink. And now I'm going to finger paint, because that's, to me, one of the things that's just the most fun about mixed media is getting inky and painty and getting my fingers in there. And I just feel like sometimes you just get the better result in that kind of like cloudy, hazy, sort of blendy, whatever. If it's not your thing, whatever. For me, it's just one of those fun things. There's areas where between the two colors, I just want to sort of blend them. Now, these are not going to react because of the gesso. They're not going to react like they would with water once they've dried, but adding that gesso wash over them just kind of gives like a little hazy, cloudy, you can kind of see almost ethereal look to it. And so I decided at this point that now I want to bring in these Tim Holtz stencils. So I'm starting out with some black gesso. This is some Dina Wakley gesso. And I'm going to actually add this watercolor wash that I have left over to this because I don't want to go straight in with the black. I just felt like it would be too overwhelming for this particular color palette to just go straight in with black. And so I'm going to make a gray. And I started off with just the black and that gesso wash. And then I wanted to warm up the gray just a little bit. So I'm adding another acrylic paint that's Dina Wakley in the color of sand. So it's kind of a cream sandy brown color, and just to warm up that the gesso mix there, so I can get a nice warm gray. And so you can kind of see here the difference between those after adding that color. So one of my favorite ways to add paint through a stencil is actually with these little super cheap makeup sponge triangle things, because the best results that you're going to get with paint, acrylic paint and a stencil is when you're using something, you really just want a little tiny bit of paint. If you go in with a brush, you're likely going to get the paint up to seep underneath there. And so these little makeup brushes or sponges are so good because it just takes a little bit of paint. Less is more with these situations. So especially like with this one that's kind of got a lot more open space than the alpha stencil that I was using, you'll just blur all of the lines and everything. So I'm going in with just a very light hand and even adding a little bit more white to kind of blend that out into the background. So you'll even see, like, I will dab a little bit of the paint and then I'll kind of dab some of that paint off. So you really need way less paint for this process than maybe what you think you do. And that just will give you the best results of acrylic paint through a stencil. And you want to be sure that you're dabbing up and down and not like sliding or smearing or like circular motion or whatever. You don't want to do any of that because you'll go up underneath the stencil. So dabbing up and down, it will give you your best results. So you can kind of see where we're at here. And I'm going to take the rest of this paint and just paint it on another piece of card so it doesn't get all wasted here. But I also am going to add some splatter. So I'm bringing in my fan brush here. I did add a little bit of water to this to make it splatter just a little bit better. Not a ton of splatters, just a few little splatters of just some little extra added interest in the background. I didn't want to go crazy with that. And then I decided I should probably add some white as well. So I rinsed off my fan brush and I'm going back in with that white gesso now over the top just to kind of brighten everything back up a little bit, especially on that one card. It kind of got dark up in that top left-hand corner. And I just think white and black or white splatters, they just help everything. So here's where I'm pulling up the rest of that paint. And I actually had a lot of paint in my paintbrush still, and I hate to waste my paint. So I'm just pulling up all of that paint, painting it onto another piece of this paper, and I'll set that aside and do something with that another time. But I'm pulling out some Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous stamps here, and I have this one that's like this botanical with the collage stuff behind it. And I absolutely love this stamp. And so I'm going to use this as kind of my focal image for this tag. And I was going to use Archival, and then at the last minute I decided to use VersaFine. And the stamping block that I'm using is not actually a stamping block here. I couldn't find my large one. So this is actually for a little die cutting machine, but you just use whatever works. So I went in with VersaFine Onyx Black ink here. And as soon as I lifted up, I could tell because of all that gesso that this was going to take a minute to dry. I could see that the ink was still very, very wet. And so what I decided to do, you can kind of see here, it's just, you can see it's even like shiny. So I decided to just come in with some clear embossing powder just so that I didn't end up smearing that image at all. And so I off camera just dried that, or set that embossing powder. And I really love the way that looks. I know it maybe looks a little bit dark. And then I decided there was a couple areas that needed a little more black as well, just to kind of balance everything out. So I went in with just a couple spots of this stencil, and then I'm not embossing that. I'm actually just going to leave that because there wasn't as much ink. I'm just going to let that dry, and then I will put all of this embossing powder back into my little container here, and then I'm going to move to a different ink. So I really wanted to use this other stencil. You can see I don't really clean my stamps sometimes, so I'm just kind of stamping them off onto my backdrop paper because this will all become collage fodder at some other point. I thought I was going to use archival. I was going to change my ink, and then I just decided to use the VersaFine again, but I wanted to use this stamp. I've had this stamp set forever, and this is the first time I have used it, so really I'm trying to use my things. So I love this stencil. But you can see the difference between kind of the open space of this one versus the other one is very kind of heavy. So I did not do any embossing powder on this one. I did heat this with my heat tool a little bit to make sure that everything was really nice and dry. And those outer circles there, I'm going back in with those same Neocolors, adding some color in there. And then I'm going to come back in with a paintbrush and activate that pigment. So I'm just very, making a little scribble here and there, that section right there, that ink was not dry. So it might have been better off to go ahead and emboss that too, but at this point, it was done. So it was fine. Just going in now with my paintbrush that's got some water in it and just activating all of that pigment. And this really just kind of brings those colors from the background and more into the foreground and just gives it a lot more interest this way. I don't know that this is the end of this tag. I may come back through and add something else, but for right now, I'm not adding any other focal images. I really just wanted to play with this color palette because, like I said, it's just so not a color palette I would gravitate towards. And so I kind of need to sit with it for a minute and see. I really love how this turned out. So I don't really know if I want to add anything else to this tag. I did use my We Are Memory Keepers punch to cut the little tag shapes at the top. You could use an old tag or just, cut it off with your scissors and it would be fine. And I did go around the one over there on the left with some archival ink in black soot just to give it a border, and I really felt like that kind of helped finish it, but I needed something darker for this other one, and so I'm using my black Stabilo pencil. This is also a water reactive graphite, and it's really nice and dark, so I'm being very careful about how I'm doing this part. I have my water brush again, and I am kind of pushing around that graphite, that pigment a little bit so that it's really, really kind of nice and dark right on the edge of the tag. And then it sort of fades into gray as it comes into the center of the tag, if that makes sense. And I feel like that just helped it with the gray that's in the background of this tag. And I'm just running along there. You can kind of push that around, and then I decided I needed a little bit of some black splatter, so I just scribbled that Stabilo pencil onto my paper, added a little water, and added a few little drops on there, and that's it. So if you like this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Consider joining my Facebook group. If you have ideas for other Tag Tuesdays, let me know in the comments, and until next time, bye.